Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to news headlines screaming about a mysterious infection spreading rapidly across the globe. The streets are chaos, governments are issuing emergency alerts, and the term, zombie apocalypse, is no longer fiction but the terrifying reality knocking at our door. Welcome to What If Horizons, where we explore the most fascinating and sometimes unsettling hypothetical scenarios, with a dash of science, history, psychology, and a sprinkle of humor. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into one of the most enduring pop culture phenomena, the zombie apocalypse. But what if it really started tomorrow? What would happen? How prepared are we? What does science say about the possibility? And most importantly, how could humanity survive such a catastrophe? Let's start by understanding the very basics. What exactly is a zombie apocalypse? The term, zombie, originated from Haitian folklore, describing reanimated corpses controlled by magic. However, in modern times, zombies are mostly depicted as infected humans who lose their cognitive functions, driven by a primal urge to feed on the living. From a scientific perspective, the idea of an infection turning people into mindless, aggressive beings is fascinating. Certain parasites and viruses in nature do manipulate their host's behavior. For example, the rabies virus can cause aggression and biting behavior in mammals. There's also the famous fungus Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, which infects ants and controls their movements to spread spores. So, while Hollywood zombies are exaggerated, behavioral manipulation by pathogens is not pure fantasy. Now, imagine a highly contagious pathogen, combining traits from these biological phenomena, but capable of spreading rapidly among humans and causing aggressive, zombie-like, symptoms. That's the kind of nightmare scenario we're dealing with. Let's pause here and consider the mechanics of such an outbreak. How would it start? Patient 0, the first infected individual, might be exposed to a mutated virus, perhaps originating from animal reservoirs or a lab accident. Early symptoms could resemble severe flu, followed by neurological deterioration, loss of higher brain functions, and then the onset of violent, compulsive behaviors. From there, the disease spreads through bites or contact with bodily fluids. Hospitals would be overwhelmed quickly. Governments would scramble to contain the outbreak, instituting quarantines and martial law. But as we've learned from recent pandemics, containment is easier said than done. Historically, human responses to pandemics have varied from calm cooperation to panic and social breakdown. The psychological and sociological impacts of such crises are complex. Fear often breeds irrational behavior, hoarding, mob violence, scapegoating. And that leads us to a critical point. The zombie apocalypse is not just a biological threat but a social one. Collapse of infrastructure, breakdown of communication, shortage of food and medicine, and distrust among communities could accelerate the downfall of civilization. But before we get overwhelmed by doom and gloom, let's look at survival strategies. What does research and experience from disaster preparedness teach us? Key factors include knowledge, resourcefulness, adaptability, and social cooperation. Being mentally prepared might be just as important as having supplies. We'll explore survival tactics, from finding safe shelters, purifying water, to self-defense, and how technology might help or hinder survival. Plus, we'll analyze cultural representations of zombies and how they reflect human fears and societal anxieties. In this series, each episode will break down these facets, blending scientific facts, expert opinions, and real-world examples, with some light humor to keep things lively. So buckle up, tomorrow might just be the start of the unexpected. If the zombie apocalypse began tomorrow, the first 72 hours would determine everything. In disaster science, this window is often referred to as the golden period, not for saving lives per se, but for setting the tone of either societal resilience or complete and utter collapse. And if there's one thing we've learned from recent global emergencies, it's that people are impressively unprepared for things they absolutely should have seen coming. Let's break it down. At the moment of outbreak, patient 0 has already likely infected several others. Maybe it started in a densely populated urban center, a subway car in New York, a market in Lagos, a festival in Rio. Crowds, noise, no one paying attention to the guy in the corner having a violent seizure, until he bites someone. Then 2, then 10, it spreads rapidly. Healthcare systems, already running at or near capacity in most countries, are immediately overwhelmed. Emergency rooms become ground zero for new infections. Doctors and nurses work without rest, wearing garbage bags instead of proper hazmat suits. Sound familiar? But what's uniquely terrifying about a zombie-like outbreak isn't just its transmissibility. It's the loss of agency. Victims don't just fall ill. They become a threat. A walking, biting, unreasoning threat. Imagine if every sick person during flu season also developed the sudden urge to chase you down a hallway. The government response will likely begin with denial. After all, admitting there's a zombie outbreak doesn't look great on the 6 o'clock news. Initial press conferences would involve phrases like, isolated incident, controlled environment, and, inevitably, we urge the public to remain calm. Which, as we all know, is the fastest way to ensure mass panic. Travel bans, curfews, and martial law would follow. Some cities would shut down entirely. Others would resist, either out of disbelief or sheer logistical impossibility. Essential infrastructure, power, sanitation, communications, starts to degrade. Panic buying begins, and within hours, supermarkets resemble post-apocalyptic movie sets. Strangely, the toilet paper aisle still goes first. Social media plays an outsized role. Misinformation spreads faster than the infection. One viral video of a bleeding, screaming individual banging on a car windshield can erase months of official reassurances. Hashtags like #ZombieFlu, #BiteWatch, or #StayHuman trend within hours. TikTok dances involving zombie impressions go viral. We laugh, but the nervous kind. Gallows humor becomes a coping mechanism. Then there's the question of how law enforcement and the military respond. Initial containment attempts would likely be brutal and messy. Civilians resisting quarantine, infected individuals misidentified as violent criminals. In the fog of bio-warfare-like panic, mistakes are inevitable. Friendly fire, civil unrest, maybe even a few localized uprisings. Not all of them will involve zombies. And yet, strangely, amid the chaos, people will try to keep going. Humans have a peculiar ability to normalize the absurd. You will see someone jogging through a park while soldiers evacuate a school 2 blocks away. There will still be emails. There is always someone emailing during the apocalypse. Meanwhile, scientists, those who haven't been bitten or evacuated, would be scrambling to identify the pathogen. Is it viral, bacterial, parasitic? Can it cross species? Is there an incubation period? Is it reversible? There's a chance the virus is similar to real-world pathogens, rabies, prions, toxoplasmosis, or something newly evolved. But the key question would be this: is this a neurological hijack or complete brain death? Are the infected still there, underneath? If they are, treatment becomes a moral issue. If they aren't, well, then the calculus becomes simpler and darker. Here's where we enter the real ethical minefield. How do you treat former humans? Do you isolate them, cure them, or eliminate the threat entirely? Different governments will answer differently. Some will attempt humane containment. Others will issue blanket kill orders. And society will split accordingly. What began as a medical crisis becomes an identity crisis, of ethics, law, humanity. So no, the first few days of a zombie outbreak are not just about survival. They're about decisions, rapid, irreversible decisions made under the weight of fear and limited information. And the terrifying truth is that those early decisions might be what actually do us in, not the infection itself, but our own inability to coordinate, cooperate, and act quickly with compassion and clarity. Now that we've survived the opening act of chaos, let's turn our attention to the engine behind it all. The virus, parasite, or whatever it is that transforms an ordinary human into a lumbering, vacant-eyed, occasionally groaning biological hazard. Because before we can hope to survive the outbreak, we need to understand the thing causing it. Zombies, in fiction, are mostly nonsense. Sorry, but it's true. Rotting corpses shouldn't be able to run marathons or survive headshots unless they've got an exclusive gym membership in the afterlife. But if we remove the Hollywood flair and consider what's biologically plausible, things get more interesting, and far more disturbing. Let's say this infection doesn't bring the dead back to life. That's the stuff of necromancers and horror movie budgets. Instead, it hijacks the living brain, shutting down higher cognitive functions, leaving behind just enough motor control to walk, run, and, most crucially, bite. There are precedents in nature. Consider rabies. Once symptoms appear, it's almost always fatal. It causes agitation, confusion, aggression, and, in animals, a tendency to bite. Rabies spreads through saliva, has a long incubation period, and can remain undetected until it's far too late. Or take prions, misfolded proteins that eat away at the brain like termites in a wooden house. They cause degenerative diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jakob. There's no cure, and they can survive harsh conditions that would kill most viruses. A prion-based zombification wouldn't burn through the population like wildfire. It would smolder, hidden, until one day, someone snaps. And then there's the terrifying prospect of parasites. Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite found in cats, can alter the behavior of infected rodents, making them less fearful of cats. Essentially, it rewires their brains to walk right into danger. Now imagine a mutated parasite that could do the same to humans. Strip away fear, amp up aggression, dampen empathy. It wouldn't create Hollywood-style zombies. It would make people reckless, violent, and indifferent to consequences. Which, if you've been on the internet lately, doesn't seem like that much of a leap. Let's say our zombie pathogen, we'll call it ZVX1, because why not, is a hybrid. Viral for speed of transmission, parasitic for behavioral control, and prion-like for slow, irreversible neurological decay. It spreads through saliva and blood. Incubation period, 12 to 24 hours. Symptoms: fever, confusion, extreme irritability, followed by a steep decline in cognitive function, loss of identity, and compulsive predatory behavior. The perfect storm. But here's the twist. ZVX1 doesn't destroy the brain completely. It leaves the brain stem and parts of the motor cortex intact. That means the infected can move, track, even coordinate in groups, not because they're thinking, but because their instincts are operating on overdrive. No personality, no memory, but plenty of motion. This would explain why zombies don't recognize their loved ones, why they don't stop to bandage their wounds or avoid obvious danger. Their world has shrunk to one primitive function: hunt. Think of them less like humans and more like heat-seeking missiles wrapped in leftover meat. And this brings us to a very uncomfortable question. If these infected people still have functioning brains, even partially, are they alive? Are they sick? Or are they something else entirely? Medical ethics crumbles here. In the early days, doctors would want to treat them, save them, administer antivirals, sedatives, maybe put them in isolation. But once hospitals overflow and the infection rate outpaces supply chains, medicine gives way to triage. And triage, in a zombie scenario, becomes black and white. Treat the living, neutralize the dangerous. Governments will be slow to acknowledge this shift. Public trust matters, but the military, tasked with stopping the spread, doesn't deal in sentimentality. If your neighbor starts snarling and charging headfirst into traffic, no one's going to argue about brain scans. In time, language changes too. They're no longer patients or infected. They're hostiles, units, or just targets. The terminology of war replaces the vocabulary of health. And the moment that shift happens, any hope for curing them fades quietly into the background noise of gunfire and radio static. Of course, there will still be scientists insisting that a cure is possible. And maybe, theoretically, one is. But research takes time, funding, facilities, and above all, safety. None of which are in abundance when your lab assistants keep trying to eat your face. So the clock is ticking. Not just for survival, but for the very idea of humanity. How we define it, who gets to keep it, and who are willing to sacrifice to preserve it. And now, with the science out of the way, it's time we get personal. Because in the next stage of this disaster, it's not about nations or pathogens. It's about people, you, me, our communities, our instincts, how we behave when the rules disappear, and all that's left is the sound of shuffling footsteps outside your window. In the first few days, society pretends everything is fine. By the second week, that illusion shatters. Supermarkets are empty. Gas stations are either dry or guarded by men with shotguns and nervous eyes. Power grids flicker. The internet slows to a crawl, then dies in patches. And with it dies something else. The sense that someone, somewhere, is still in control. You will notice it first in the silence. Cities, once constant hums of human activity, grow eerily quiet. No car horns, no planes overhead, no music leaking from apartment windows. Just the occasional scream in the distance, quickly cut off. Or worse, a rhythmic thud, like someone pounding on a locked door long after they should have stopped moving. At this point, most people are no longer debating the semantics of zombie. Survival has become instinctual. Those with rural access, hunting skills, and distrust of modern society suddenly go from conspiracy theorists to community leaders. Meanwhile, everyone who mocked preppers now finds themselves Googling how to purify water with a sock, assuming, of course, the internet is still working. And let's talk about water. It runs until it doesn't. Same with power. Municipal workers, bless them, kept systems running for as long as they could, even when their own families were fleeing. But systems need people, and people, it turns out, don't do well in pandemics that involve chewing. By now, groups have formed. Some are cooperative, families, neighbors, office workers who managed to get stuck in the same building and decided not to kill each other. Others are, well, less cooperative. Opportunists, ex-military, ex-cons, ex-baristas with control issues. When you take away the law, leadership becomes a question of who holds the most ammo and the fewest scruples. And then there's the government, or what's left of it. Depending on the country, you might still hear emergency broadcasts, often pre-recorded. Stay inside, remain calm, help is on the way. But it's not really. Most government resources are tied up in defense, defending critical infrastructure, VIPs, research facilities, maybe a few underground bunkers where top officials are playing chess and arguing over whether the CDC still counts as part of the executive branch. And don't expect your local mayor to save you. City officials are now either infected, missing, or holed up with what remains of the police force, trying to enforce curfews on streets where curfew violations are the least of anyone's worries. What emerges in the vacuum isn't order, it's improvisation. People create ad hoc rules. Apartment complexes turn into compounds. Malls become fortresses. Someone with carpentry skills becomes king of the block. The guy with the working radio is now the oracle. And your neighbor who used to rant about fluoride in the tap water, he now runs a surprisingly efficient barter system. In this strange new world, skills are currency. Practical ones. Can you sew? Can you fix a generator? Can you shoot without crying? If the answer is yes to any of those, you're in demand. If you're a lifestyle coach or cryptocurrency influencer, best start learning how to fish. The economy, in any recognizable form, is dead. Gold is worthless, so are stocks. No one is checking the Dow Jones when there's a shambling corpse chewing through your pantry door. What matters now are items with immediate survival value. Batteries, antibiotics, canned food, clean socks. The real American dream now. A propane tank and a working lighter. And yet, despite all this, people adapt. It's strange how quickly we recalibrate. A week ago, you were annoyed about your phone's battery life. Today, you're grateful for a book of matches. Yesterday, your biggest stressor was email overload. Now, it's deciding who gets the last protein bar in the group. Weirdly, even culture doesn't disappear. Humans are compulsive storytellers. Around campfires or candlelit basements, people retell what happened, what they saw, what they lost. Someone inevitably starts a journal. Someone else hums a tune that gets stuck in everyone's head. And when a child asks if the monsters will come tonight, someone still says, not if we're quiet. Because in the end, we don't just fight for survival. We fight to stay human. To remember laughter. To protect stories. To believe, however irrationally, that this, too, might pass. But before any of that happens, we have to deal with something else. The survivors. Because not everyone left alive is someone you want on your team. Now that we've adjusted to the silence, the scarcity, and the slow realization that no cavalry is coming, we're left with the one variable that's always been unpredictable even in the best of times: other people. The thing about disasters is they don't create chaos so much as expose it. They peel away the packaging of civilization and show you what's been festering underneath. Sometimes it's hope, sometimes it's horror, usually, it's a confusing mix of both. At first, you think, maybe it's just the infected you need to worry about. They're loud, smelly, and not great conversationalists. But after a few run-ins with other survivors, you start to realize the real danger isn't the ones trying to eat you. It's the ones who still know how to lie. Let's break down the new archetypes of the apocalypse. These aren't found in textbooks. They're discovered in parking garages, abandoned grocery stores, and what used to be your neighbor's cheerful suburban home that now smells faintly of smoke and regret. First, there's the hoarder. Not your average pack rat. We're talking basement bunkers with enough toilet paper to mummify an army. They're not sharing. Don't even ask. If you try to trade, be prepared to offer your soul, or at least a really good solar-powered flashlight. These folks aren't evil, per se. They just made an early bet on civilization collapsing and, unfortunately, they were right. Next, the wannabe warlord. He probably used to be an assistant manager at a car dealership. Now he's got a vest full of stolen police gear and refers to himself as Commander Drake. He's built himself a little kingdom out of a strip mall and rules with the charisma of a traffic cone and the diplomacy of a caffeine-deprived raccoon. His followers, mostly terrified teenagers and people who flunked out of community theater but still crave an audience. Then there are the fanatics. Every crisis births a few. They come in various flavors. Religious zealots, techno-utopians, conspiracy bloggers who finally feel vindicated. Their messages vary, but their certainty is always absolute. Some believe the undead are divine punishment. Others think it's the government's fault, and the only cure is drinking bleach while chanting into a ham radio. These groups rarely last long, but they're surprisingly good at recruiting the lonely, the desperate, and the extremely bored. On the flip side, you have the idealists. The ones who still believe in rebuilding, in cooperation, in ethics. They'll try to organize food rotations, rebuild trust, maybe even host a movie night powered by a hand crank and a scavenged DVD of Shrek 2. These are the people you want around, not just because they remind you what humanity looks like, but because they're the least likely to stab you for a can of beans. And yet, survival makes philosophers of us all. Even the nicest group eventually hits hard questions. What do you do when someone gets bit and hides it? Who decides who eats when rations run low? If one person's mistake puts the rest at risk, do you exile them? Execute them? Pretend it didn't happen and hope the zombie chewing sounds aren't coming from your tent. These aren't hypothetical anymore. They're Tuesday. The moral gray zone expands quickly. You'll see it in the way people look at strangers. Not with curiosity, but calculation. Are they sick, armed, useful? Are they worth the risk? The apocalypse doesn't make us monsters. It just makes the math crueler. And here's a bitter truth. Not everyone wants the world to go back to normal. Some people thrive in chaos. They like not paying taxes. They enjoy being feared. They like that their weird obsession with tactical gear finally pays off. For the first time in their lives, they feel powerful. And power, as it turns out, is a hard habit to break. Still, there are moments, quiet ones, where humanity flickers. A shared meal, a rescued child, someone giving up the last candy bar because, as they say, no one should die without tasting caramel one more time. These moments don't make headlines, but they're why civilization might still have a shot. But only if we make it through winter. Because if you think zombies are terrifying, wait until you try heating a house with optimism and half a bottle of lighter fluid. Winter doesn't care that the world ended. It arrives, as it always does, with indifference and a sharp breeze that turns your nose into a brittle ornament. Only now, there's no central heating, no weather app, no helpful news anchor cheerfully warning you to bundle up before stepping into what is essentially the outdoors version of a meat locker. The cold changes everything. Zombies slow down. Yes. That's the good news. The bad news is, so do you. Frostbite becomes a bigger threat than teeth. Water freezes. Batteries die. People huddle together not out of camaraderie but because shared body heat is now the most dependable utility. Those romantic scenes from old Christmas movies. Replace the cocoa with boiled rainwater and the fireplace with a metal trash can someone set on fire using broken IKEA furniture. You start to ration noise. A cough might give away your position. A scream invites company. Even joy becomes something you whisper. And then, of course, there's food. Summer and fall let you scavenge. Shelves still had a few dusty cans. Orchards still had apples if you got there early. But now the trees are bare, gardens are dead, and anyone with a working greenhouse is being worshipped like a deity. Ever watched a grown adult cry over a single potato? You will. Meat is tricky. Hunting is possible, but animals have gotten skittish. Turns out even deer don't like the sound of zombies groaning through the forest like depressed backup singers. Traps work, but not reliably. And fishing, while peaceful, requires standing still long enough to freeze your legs off. Which brings us to the most disturbing culinary development of the apocalypse, the questionable stew. No one talks about what's in it. Everyone eats it. It smells vaguely edible. The meat is stringy, the texture suspiciously uniform, and no one asks questions like, what was its name? Or, why does this taste like regret? But humans are adaptable. We start inventing recipes. Rat kebabs, seagull omelets, moldy bread pudding. Someone will try to ferment something. Someone else will attempt to make zombie jerky, not because they want to eat it, but because the boredom of winter makes people ambitious in all the worst directions. Still, community becomes more important than ever. Fires are shared, stories are told, people huddle in abandoned school gyms, subway stations, even those weird fake villages built for real estate marketing. Anywhere with walls, really. Privacy becomes a myth. You sleep shoulder to shoulder, and if someone snores too loudly, they're gently reminded with a sock to the face. Or a boot. Depends on how tired people are. And with all that closeness, conflict is inevitable. One person hoards socks, another steals extra food, someone insists on singing the same 3 Taylor Swift choruses every night until everyone begins plotting how to use them as bait. But you endure, somehow. Because winter has an unexpected effect. It slows the chaos. Zombies freeze. Raiding parties dwindle. Everything is harder, including being terrible. Which gives people a chance to think. Not everyone wants to. Thinking is dangerous when you're surrounded by reminders of what used to be. But for some, the quiet brings clarity. Plans are made, not just for the next meal, but for rebuilding. For clearing nearby houses. For teaching kids how to read again. For planting something when the snow melts. And every so often, there's laughter. The kind that bubbles up from somewhere you thought was gone. Someone slips on ice. Someone burns a hole in their pants trying to sit too close to the fire. Someone tells a joke so stupid, so gloriously awful, that it sends half the camp into wheezing fits of exhausted joy. In that moment, the zombies feel far away. But they're not. They're just waiting. Because as spring approaches and the ice begins to melt, so do the barriers that kept you safe. The infected begin to move again. The roads, once frozen and impassable, open up. Migration begins. Not just of birds and animals, but of the undead, and worse, the still alive opportunists who were biding their time. Winter was never the real enemy. It was just the intermission. Spring arrives not like a promise, but like a prank. The snow melts, revealing everything you hoped had simply disappeared. Spoiled food, bones, half-written warnings scrawled on walls in spray paint. Corpses that had frozen in mid-stagger, now thawing with an enthusiasm nature usually reserves for tulips. Everyone had hoped spring would be a new beginning. In a way, it is. Just not the kind that inspires acoustic guitar soundtracks and heartfelt montages. Instead, spring is mud. Disease. A smell that seems to rise from the earth itself and crawl into your nose like it paid rent there. The zombies return to motion with unsettling eagerness. Limbs stiff but determined. Some are missing parts, dragging themselves through muck like a group project where only one person did the work. They don't move fast, but they move, and that's enough. Communities that survived the cold now face a different kind of test: expansion. They need more supplies, more room. A few brave, or bored, people form scouting parties. They venture out, avoiding main roads, moving like cautious raccoons with better backpacks. Every trip is a gamble. Maybe you find a crate of old MREs. Maybe you find an abandoned church where something inside is still very much not abandoned. The stakes are high, the rewards are edible, the rules of scavenging evolve. Early on, you grabbed whatever you could carry. Now, you've become choosy. Is this can of peas worth carrying 4 miles uphill? Do we really need another set of broken headphones? Is it morally wrong to steal a child's bicycle if the child in question is now definitely a zombie? Debates get strange. Spring also brings mobility. And with mobility comes visitors. Other survivors. Not always friendly. Some come to trade, others come to take. You'll meet people who claim to have come from faraway cities. They tell stories that sound like lies but might be true. One group swears they saw a working helicopter. Another says there's a cruise ship out at sea, circling, broadcasting static. One woman insists there's a town run entirely by librarians who've turned their cataloging skills into a form of quiet governance. You learn to listen but not trust. Everyone is tired. Everyone is hungry. Everyone has at least one story about someone they loved who didn't make it. Spring, more than winter, makes you sentimental. You start noticing the little things again. Budding leaves, birds, the way someone hums while cleaning a rifle. It feels wrong, sometimes, to enjoy anything. Like happiness might attract attention. Or karma, but you do it anyway. Because if the undead haven't stopped moving, neither have you. People begin to plan again. Not just for survival, but for something more. A small garden, a school, a map. Someone builds a crude wind turbine out of junk and suddenly becomes the village celebrity. Someone else stitches together pieces of old signage and creates a new flag, which no one agrees on but everyone finds comforting. And yet, there's a tension in the air. The kind that comes when people start to believe they might actually make it. Hope is dangerous. It makes you take risks. It makes you trust again. And when that trust is broken, the fall feels worse than the bite. Because not all wounds in this new world come with teeth. By now, survival is no longer the goal. It's the baseline. You've figured out how to filter water with a sock and crushed charcoal. You know which types of canned beans cause the least gastrointestinal regret. You can spot a walker from 200 yards by the way it refuses to respect the concept of personal space. But once basic needs are met, people start asking the harder questions. Who's in charge? Who decides what's fair? Who gets the last antibiotic when there are two people coughing and only one seems vaguely likable? Power, in the post-apocalypse, is not taken. It's negotiated, argued over, quietly hoarded, and occasionally assigned to the loudest person with the most opinions and the fewest qualifications. You know, like before, leaders emerge. Some are elected, some just start shouting orders until everyone gets too tired to argue. One group insists on democratic voting, which devolves into an 8-hour screaming match over whether expired Twinkies count as currency. Another adopts a kind of benevolent dictatorship led by a retired veterinarian with a calm voice and the cold, unwavering stare of someone who's euthanized things larger than you. Rules begin to take shape. Don't steal. Don't hoard. Don't scream unless it's absolutely necessary. No singing before 9 a.m. Absolutely no acoustic guitar covers of Wonderwall. Not again. Not after what happened last time. These micro-societies start to differ wildly. Some are rigid, like tiny dystopias with clipboards. Others are loose, chaotic communes where everyone pretends to agree until something catches fire. One place tries to run like a corporate office, complete with job titles and motivational posters. Another takes inspiration from medieval Europe, which sounds fun until someone gets accused of sorcery because their sourdough starter keeps bubbling suspiciously. You quickly learn that civilization isn't a fixed state. It's a negotiation. Every group must decide how much order they're willing to tolerate before it starts feeling like tyranny, and how much chaos they can stomach before someone gets stabbed with a broom handle. And amidst all this, the infected remain. Less numerous, perhaps, but always present. A reminder, a punctuation mark at the end of every plan. Because every time someone suggests expanding the perimeter, planting more crops, fixing the radio tower, there's always a pause. The unspoken question: what happens when they come back? Not if, when. Some believe a cure is still possible. Others say that's a fairy tale told by people who can't accept the loss. A few cling to the theory that the zombies are evolving, which is unsettling considering they still haven't figured out doorknobs. But the real fear, the real, deep, festering anxiety, that we're evolving too, that we're getting used to this, that somewhere along the way, the emergency became the norm. The barricades, the rationing, the way we flinch at every sudden noise. That maybe we've built our little safe zones not as a bridge to the world that was, but as bunkers to forget it. And when someone finds a mirror, a rare, uncracked one, and sees their face, sunburned, grimy, gaunt, they don't think, I want to go back. They think, this is me now. And maybe that's the scariest part. By the 9th month of the new world, someone will inevitably say it. We should start a government. The words hang in the air like a bad smell, and no one wants to be the first to react, because everyone remembers what happened the last time people tried to organize anything more complicated than a canned food schedule. There were tears. There were arguments. Someone got chased with a ladle. But it happens anyway. Because humans are hardwired for systems, for rules, for hierarchies. We can't help ourselves. Leave us alone for long enough and we'll invent bylaws for how to share a compost toilet. So meetings begin. They start casual. Someone proposes a rotating leadership council. Someone else insists on electing a single mayor. A third person suggests a decentralized anarcho-syndicalist commune and is immediately banned from further participation due to excessive syllables. Documents are drawn up. Actual documents. On paper. With pens. It's adorable. Someone remembers Robert's rules of order. Someone else remembers that Robert was a tedious man who should have been eaten by page 4. Committees form. Agriculture. Security. Sanitation. Morale. There's a proposal to form a committee for reviewing committee efficiency. It gets tabled. A school is set up in a former nail salon. Children gather in rows of salon chairs, learning math between walls still plastered with posters of unnervingly cheerful women holding glittery acrylic claws. Someone starts a newsletter. Someone else offers to teach history, and everyone realizes no one's entirely sure what to include. Do we talk about pre-apocalypse politics? Do we teach economics? Or just jump straight to, don't eat glowing mushrooms and always check the attic twice? Trade routes emerge. Communities start bartering. A working radio is gold. Antibiotics are platinum. A full bottle of hot sauce might get you an actual functioning bicycle, or at least a promise not to be punched. And for a moment, it feels like something real. Something permanent. Until the illusions begin to crack. Because rebuilding isn't about going back. It's about deciding what parts are worth dragging forward. You remember air travel. You remember health insurance. You remember 2 a.m. existential scroll sessions on your phone while lying in bed under the soft glow of targeted shampoo ads. You remember traffic, office politics, artisanal cupcakes with ironic names. And you realize, with a strange mixture of guilt and relief, that you don't miss all of it. Some things, yes, music, hugs, the feeling of ordering food and having someone else make it. But other things, you're not so sure. You look around and realize that people aren't trying to recreate the past anymore. They're remixing it. There's a library with no locks. A shared kitchen with no tips. People take turns fixing each other's clothes. No one cares what job you used to have. They care if you're kind. If you pull your weight. If you can tell a good story or fix a solar panel or make a stew that doesn't taste like a dare. Of course, not everything is utopia. There are still fights, jealousies, the occasional theft or betrayal or one-person power trip. Someone gets caught hoarding aspirin. Someone else is exiled for trying to restart a pyramid scheme, this time involving dried mangoes. But for every failure, there's something surprising. A former barista becomes the best medic in the region, simply because they cared enough to learn. A teenager with anxiety builds a tracking system using colored string and scraps of cardboard. A dog learns how to detect infected, and gets more respect than most adults ever did. And maybe, just maybe, there's a lesson in all this. That civilization was never about skyscrapers or stock markets. It was about how we treated each other when no one was watching. 1 year later, you almost forget the world ended. Not because it got better, but because you adapted. Your hands are rougher now. Your eyes stay open longer. You walk differently, with the awareness of someone who knows walls are just delays, not guarantees. You don't flinch at groans anymore. You've learned to tell the difference between wind and footsteps. Between panic and strategy. Between hunger and the kind of empty that food doesn't fix. Your group, your community, still stands. Some new faces, some old ones, changed. There are scars, there are stories, there's laughter, though it tends to be quieter now. Funnier, somehow, more earned. And somewhere deep in a forest, by a river that still remembers how to reflect the sky, you see something unexpected. A child, laughing, not out of madness or mockery or the final stages of fever, but simply because they saw a frog wearing a leaf like a hat. And in that moment, for just a heartbeat, the world feels almost gentle again. You sit by the fire that night and someone plays a broken ukulele. The strings are wrong, the rhythm is worse, but no one tells them to stop. You let the sound fill the space between silences, and for the first time in a long while, no one reaches for their weapon. The zombies are still out there. Somewhere. Wandering. Decomposing. Relentless. But they're not the story anymore. You are. Not the end. Not the survivors. The rebuilders. You didn't just live through the apocalypse. You changed its meaning. Because if the world can break overnight, maybe it can be reshaped the same way. Not by heroes, not by chosen ones, just by tired people who refuse to quit, who plant things, who teach, who hold the line, who watch each other's backs not out of fear, but out of choice. So when the next traveler comes through and asks, what happened here? You won't say, the world ended. You'll say, we started something better. And hey, if you made it this far, through all 10 parts, the chaos, the sarcasm, the unexpected frog hat, then you're exactly the kind of person we want hanging around our campfire. So don't just disappear into the shadows. Like this podcast. Comment if you've got thoughts or theories about what you'd do in a zombie apocalypse. And subscribe, because next time, we might just explore what happens if artificial intelligence wakes up and realizes it's bored. This is What If Horizons. And the end was only the beginning.